This here is a brand new GoPro MAX 2. They've been putting it through its paces across all sorts of different scenarios, above water, underwater, even way above water, all to see how well it works. Now I've also been doing a full comparison to the Insta360 X5 as well as the DJI Osmo 360 cameras, as there are both a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. As always though, I'm going to tell you what's great and what sucks because there's a bunch of things in both of those camps. Now normally in these types of videos I compare all the newness to the existing model. The problem in this case though is the existing model of this camera was from 6 years ago, and a lot has obviously changed in that realm. The easiest way to think about the Max 2 though is that they took a GoPro Hero 13 Black in terms of all the features and functionality bits and then merged it with all the sensors and whatnot for a new Max 360 camera at 8K. That's like the simplest version here. But first up, let's just simply get the price out of the way. It comes in at $499 US, pretty darn competitive in this space, and it's good to see GoPro is still competing on price. Next, let's look at the hardware form factor. As you can see, they've gone with the same kind of overall feel as the DJI camera, a little bit shorter than that one, but also a tiny bit heavier than it, versus the Insta360 one is a little bit longer. Now you can obviously have like all sorts of what are effectively political debates about which camera form factor that you like, but ultimately it kind of comes down to where you're going to mount it. I find for mounting things on your head, helmets, whatever the case is, that these sort of form factors of the GoPro and the DJI are a little bit better, versus if you got a pole mount, then the longer one here might make a little bit more sense, though I haven't really had any problems with these either. From a weight standpoint, the GoPro basically just sits in the middle of those two, but all kind of in the same general ballpark. Meanwhile, from a mounting standpoint, GoPro's got its usual like threesome, if you will. So in this case, it's got the mounting fingers that you see on the bottom there for the standard GoPro mounts that are used on virtually every accessory out there in the world. And then from there, you can flip these down and you've got a standard tripod mount in the middle there. But this is also magnetic. Let me see if I got something magnetic around. Okay, found something magnetic. This wrench here is magnetic, and so the idea being that you can mount it to things like that wherever you want. Oh, and of course it's compatible with GoPro's bi-directional clip system as well, so you can see you just pop it in and pop it out with just a simple press of the button. Now a quick note that if you are finding this video interesting or useful, just simply watch it all the way through. That's the only thing the YouTube gods care about these days, and it really does help out this video and the channel quite a bit. So let's get into the good stuff, and starting off with the resolution. This is 8K, except GoPro's touting it is true 8K as opposed to their competitors being more like 7-ish K. And now this is an interesting concept. So if you look at the way 360 cameras take these two lenses here, there are two lenses on a 360 camera. They both have sensors within them, and they basically stitch these two lens pictures together. Here's an example of what that picture looks like, kind of separated out as those two lenses. And that fuzzy area is a bit that's the stitch area, and it overlaps them together. And then from there, those two pieces that are the clear parts of the picture, that's what's considered the actual resolution of the camera. Except that's not always what other companies have done. About like 8 or 9 months ago, popular YouTuber iPhondo basically did a video where he showed that the Insta360 camera is counting that black portion there as part of the 8K image. Now, of course, that black portion is entirely unusable. It's just simply the unused parts of the sensor. And in fact, the same is true on the DJI camera as well. And that's why GoPro is seemingly going to great pains to point out the fact that their camera has roughly 20% more actual usable resolution than their competitor. I find this notable because when it comes to like picking fights with the competitors, GoPro has historically always kind of rolled over and been like, don't hurt me. And this is the first time like they're going on the offensive. They've even published an entire document on a site on how you can do these sensor comparisons yourself to show you the fact that their camera has more resolution than their competitors. But as always, when it comes to choosing sensors, there are flip sides to that we'll talk about in just a second. Now, I've been shooting a ton of comparison footage between these three cameras. First off, it is a giant pain in the butt to reframe 3 separate cameras the exact same way for every single comparison shot, but nonetheless, I've been trying. I will also put some of that comparison footage down in a Dropbox or something share in case you want to download it yourself. In general, I find them all relatively similar. I would say that the DJI over sharpens a little bit, which is something that's been a common complaint for a lot of people, but I think the Insta360 and the GoPro tend to be the best of the two from an image quality standpoint. Still, there are of course going to be scenarios where you're going to see that extra 20% resolution. Whether or not those matter to you is a different story. Now, one of the things that people misunderstand about 360 cameras, or that's changed over the years, is the goal, generally speaking today, isn't to watch the content back from this camera as a 360 world that you look around around and constantly change the view all the time yourself as a viewer. Instead, the idea is to be able to reframe a shot afterwards out of that 360 bubble to get the shot that you actually want. While I hate the term like shoot now, reframe later, because that misses a lot of the whole framing to begin with, there's some aspects that are true. Further, with 360 cameras, when you shoot on a long pole like you see right here, that pole basically disappears from the image altogether, leaving the perspective that you see on the bikes right now, where basically the camera is simply hovering out in front of us. That, of course, is not new on 360 cameras, either GoPro or their competitors. What is new, though, is GoPro's new tools to be able to do some of the reframing within the GoPro Quik app. So on mobile, you have the GoPro Quik app, and that basically allows you to go ahead and reframe things to get the shot that you want. You can do that manually, or you can use this new smart tracking feature, which will track different objects. This allows you to draw a square around something, like for example, my wife here cycling along, and the camera will then track that regardless of where I was waving the camera in the air, it'll keep a track on her. And generally speaking, it does a really good job of that. Even throughout this entire tracking experience, I'll skip around a couple sections here, when she went ahead a bit and back forward, all that kind of stuff, it got the tracking correct. Now, sometimes the framing wasn't perfect, and there's kind of two ways to fix that. At the bottom there's a bunch of options for how quickly it adjusts the framing and the way it looks, or you can also just go ahead and manually reframe any given section and it'll keep that particular framing. All of this works really well and is pretty easy and is relatively similar to what their competitors do as well. However, one downside though is this is only available on the GoPro Quik mobile app and not the desktop. On the desktop side, you can do all the manual keyframing and all the reframing and all the stuff that you want to do, except not the automatic tracking piece. That means that you have to manually do everything when their competitors and their desktop software suites allow you to automatically do everything. It's clear that Insta360 has a huge lead on the desktop side here, and then behind that is DJI with its recently introduced desktop suite that's still pretty darn buggy. GoPro needs to invest in that desktop software and bring it up to spec with some of the features from Insta360's app. So given that, one of the things that's worthwhile noting is that since you're going to have to use that phone app for a lot of the automatic reframing, they do allow you to go ahead and plug the camera straight into your phone to download the footage. That is way, way, way faster than doing it over Wi-Fi and just makes the entire downloading footage process super efficient. The next two pieces GoPro has added to make that reframing easier is two dedicated modes on camera itself. So the first one is POV mode. The idea being, if you were to go ahead and mount this as a chest mount for something like that, or on your helmet, it'll go ahead and keep the orientation of the camera facing forward the entire time, and it'll basically set that as a default perspective in that video. Now in this mode, it's still shooting a 360 video. By default, 5.6K, but you can also bump that up to 8K as well. But the goal here is to give you like a quick access reframe shot already out of the box for that footage. If you want to reframe it later on, you can still do that. The same is true for the other kind of automated mode, which is the selfie mode. Same exact concept, except in this case, it's going to keep focused on you when you hold up that selfie stick. I've used both of these modes and they generally work pretty well. I would though spend the time to simply bump up the resolution to 8K versus the 5.6K, because if you bought it, you might as well use it. And now some of these views are only available in single lens mode. So GoPro, like all their competitors, allows you to use just one of the two lenses at a time. The idea there being that if you know it's already up against your chest, you don't really have a reason to use that back lens. It's kind of pointless. So in single lens mode, it's going to save you a bunch of storage and it's going to shoot a smaller file, a 4K file in this case. It's got all of the original GoPro MAX lens views, or digital lenses if you will, as well as all the ones that you might see on the GoPro MAX lens mod on a regular GoPro camera, a non-360 camera. And then further, the file that's spit out after the fact is just a plain video file as opposed to being a 360 file. Generally makes editing a little bit easier as well. And while 4K is definitely far less than 5.3K in terms of resolution math, about half the resolution, I find this handy when you know that back camera is just pointed at nothing, like your shirt, etc. And this simply saves you a bunch on the workflow side. Next up, we're going to talk about some things that aren't super awesome, starting off with slow motion. All three of these cameras have relatively similar specs in that realm. They're all basically shooting at a lower resolution, and they're all essentially shooting at about 100 frames per second. That is like a fraction of what normal action cameras can shoot at for these resolutions. As an example of this here, I'm going to give you kind of a couple different cannonballs here because that's the best way to test slow motion. And so to begin with, when you choose that 100 frame per second option, that means the 360 sphere on all these cameras is shooting at 4K. That's a starting point for the entire 360 sphere. But once you punch out the portion that you're actually viewing, now you're down to 1080p. And as you can see right here, this is not awesome 1080p. Like, this takes an amazing image, an amazing shot, and makes it look pretty like 1998. And this is true across all three cameras. They all sort of suck here. Just for a comparison here is the GoPro Hero 13 Black at 5.3K, 120 frames per second burst mode. And you can see it is so crispy compared to what you just saw on the 360 cameras. I get that this is like a sensor trade-off, and all three camera companies are largely using the same sensors, and so they're all kind of beholden to the same problem. But if you're shooting a lot of slow motion stuff, I wouldn't be getting a 360 camera for it. Now, the next piece that sucks here is the low light footage. I really thought in 2025 GoPro would invest in a sensor that works in this camera for low light footage. They chose not to do that. So as you can see side by side here, the GoPro's low light footage is not awesome at all. Now, in asking GoPro about this, I was like, dude, what's the deal? And they said that essentially it was a trade-off in size of the camera. They noted that if they would add that pipeline for the low light footage, it would increase the size of the camera to roughly the same size that DJI did. And they said that ultimately they thought the vast majority of the users would instead appreciate the higher resolution daytime footage than improved low light footage, which I guess, except for the fact that GoPro also released today the GoPro Lit camera, which is literally a camera with a light on the front of it to be able to shoot at night. That's a separate review down the road though. Now let's turn that frown upside down and talk about the lenses themselves. These are user replaceable lenses, in particular user replaceable lenses out in the field, something that GoPro has teased on Instagram for the past month and a half since DJI's camera came out that doesn't have such lenses. You have to send this camera back with an unknown time frame of how long that takes, and that really sucks, especially if you're traveling somewhere. That means this camera is useless if you do heavily scratch or break the lenses. Insta360 does allow user replaceable lenses, but I'm sure we can all make this work in a hotel room if we had to on our vacation. In the case of GoPro, you just simply pop the lens off. Let me just do it right here in front of you. There we go. And it's as simple as that. Pops right off. Like they say, you can do this anywhere. Now, if you've had a 360 camera, you know that replaceable lenses is a big deal these days. In fact, somehow I've already slightly scratched and scuffed my DJI one since this past summer. I made a point though on all my comparison footage to use the non-scratch side, just in case it made any difference at all. Now, the next piece is that GoPro says this lens is really durable. So durable that you can whack it on things and whatnot. And I've already seen that. I had it fall over on a concrete area next to a pool when I was immediately like, oh fudge, I've just scratched it, but it's perfectly fine. They also demonstrated how durable it is if you just whack the crap out of that. So I'm gonna do that now live for the first time, hoping I don't break this on camera. So here we go. That was, there's no scratch on there. There's nothing. I think we agree that was a pretty hard whack. I can do it again just for fun. I'm probably gonna break my IKEA table. Yeah, it's perfectly clear. There's a bit of dust on there. Let me just get the dust. Yeah, that's very nice. Anyways, we'll stop trying to break cameras. The next good thing here is there's GPS inside the Max 2. This allows you to do overlays after the fact. You can turn off the GPS if you want to save some battery life, of course, but hey, the GPS is inside of this, allowing you to get those overlays as stickers after the fact. Now, speaking of those batteries, as you might expect with the previous camera being 6 years old, it's not going to have the same battery as that. Unfortunately, it's also not the same battery as the GoPro Hero 13 Black. That is one thing I love about the DJI camera, is it's the same battery as their standard action cameras, which is really handy. In any case, this is an enduro battery, which means that it basically has really good low temperature performance as well for skiing and whatnot. It'll work just fine there. From a battery performance standpoint, here's the official claims on the screen somewhere down there as well. When it comes to overheating, I had zero problems when I was out moving through airflow in some capacity, just like all cameras. But when you put it in a static scenario in the sun like I did this morning, then it did overheat, as did some of its competitors, except those ones lasted a fair bit longer. But I also did another test where I'm at 27 minutes, so yeah. Ultimately, overheating isn't really an issue, again, when you're actually moving through airflow. It's more of a challenge if you have it mounted inside somewhere where there's no airflow. Speaking of hot and spicy, you may want to jump in the water. This camera is fully waterproof down to 5 meters, or whatever that is in feet, but it's not really going to work super well underwater. All three of these cameras here require some sort of dive case underwater. That's because of the curved lenses there. When it goes underwater, everything looks fuzzy. As you can see right there on this footage from the GoPro Max 2, it's not very sharp. In comparison, here's some footage shot just a minute or two later on the GoPro Hero 13 Black, and it is super crispy because it has that flat lens on the front there. GoPro says they are creating a dive case for this, but they don't have a timeline or a price. Mind you, when both DJI as well as Insta360 came out with their respective new models, they didn't have timelines for their new cases either, so hopefully this all happens relatively quickly. Now, the next bit worthwhile noting is this camera can pair up to Bluetooth headphones, so you can go ahead and do that. This is helpful if you have it mounted on the outside of a car or something like this. I can see right here. You can then use your Bluetooth headphones as a microphone connected to the camera. Simple audio test right here as we head up this hill, just with the AirPod Pro 2s connected via Bluetooth to the GoPro Max 2. Nothing complex, simple as that. That said, the camera does have 6 microphones already. That gives you both 360 audio, meaning if you are listening on a pair of headphones that support it, you can basically walk around the camera and you'll hear that same sort of audio in your head there, which is pretty darn cool. But also it's useful for wind reduction. Here's a sample of that as I'm going about 40-50 kilometers an hour. Just a quick audio test of the microphones as we go here down. Going about 40 kilometers an hour roughly right now on this twisty, turny route. So moving away from audio to something without audio, photos. There are all the photo modes that you've come to expect on a GoPro Hero 13 Black camera, now on this camera as well. Generally speaking, I don't shoot photos on a GoPro too often. I'd rather shoot the video and just extract the still frame from it, because it's way easier to get the exact shot I want. That's something that GoPro and most other camera companies recommend as well. It just makes the entire workflow a lot easier. Likewise, there's a whole assortment of time-lapse options as well, the same that you'd find in a regular GoPro camera. And there's also the night effects, just like you'd find in a GoPro camera as well. An example of night effects being these star trails that you see right here. You basically mount it somewhere at night and it just automatically compiles these videos. It's super easy. There's also vehicle light trails and all the same modes that you would have had on the GoPro Hero 13 Black, now on the Max 2. Now, rounding home here on some of the geekery specs before we wrap things up a little bit, it does support 10-bit as well as log, so you can shoot in both of those. However, more geeky than that is that at launch, they have GoPro Labs support. GoPro Labs is this really cool, basically special firmware you load in this camera that gives you a ton of extra features. We're talking dozens. Some of them, for example, include the ability to go up to 300 megabits per second as a bit rate on this camera, well beyond any other camera on the market here. It also gives the ability to capture dual hemisphere mode, so basically a special way to look at that footage after the fact. It gives you larger chapter sizes up to 100 gigabytes if you want. It gives you a histogram. It gives you a ton more geeky features. In addition, in the GoPro Quik app, there's the ability to go ahead and have a bunch of specialized camera moves here. These are things that seem a little bit gimmicky at times, but if you use them very sparingly, like once every 3 years, then it's all right. The internet will approve. Nonetheless, they are there if you want them. But again, unfortunately, only on the GoPro Quik app on smartphone mobile, as opposed to the desktop. And the last thing that's worthwhile noting here is this camera fully supports GoPro's cloud, meaning that if you have GoPro's subscription service, when you plug this camera in, it connects to Wi-Fi, uploads all your footage to the cloud, unlimited footage at full resolution. That's all there. I find that super handy. Just have a backup of my footage. We've seen Insta360 do the same thing recently as well. But if you've already got a GoPro camera, then it's all part of that same package there. Okay, so where do we stand overall? Well, I think if you're in the GoPro ecosystem, then this camera makes a ton of sense. Obviously, it's got the same mounting tidbits on the bottom there. It's got accessibility into the GoPro cloud, the GoPro app, all your existing footages, all that kind of goodness. Same goes if you're prone to break things, and the replaceable lenses are pretty handy. And then likewise, if you really want the absolute highest usable resolution, this camera makes the most sense. On the flip side, some of their competitors have more options when it comes to software features. Insta360 just has so many more software features, especially of course on the desktop app side, that make the editing workflow a lot easier if you're on a desktop computer. But I'll do a full comparison, as I said, between these 3 cameras. I've been collecting tons of comparison footage side by side, so I can run through not just the footage, but all the features and tell you where all those trade-offs are. Definitely hit subscribe for that at the bottom. In the meantime, though, it is great to see GoPro back in the game with the 360 camera, as well as that new lit camera that I'll review here in due course. With that, have a good one.